Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to another review. Today's loco is a model of the world's largest steam locomotive. Ever since the dawn of my YouTube channel, people have been asking me to review one of these. And yet I never have done, because obviously as the world's largest steam locomotive, they are quite expensive and it's quite a lot of money to afford. Also, I had concerns about such a large loco running on my layout where the curves are quite tight. But do you know what? This channel is 10 years old this year. People have been asking me to do one of these for years, so it's clearly what the people want to see. So at long last, after about 10 years of people asking, I've gone and purchased one. So here is my first ever big boy locomotive. Now, look at this box. It doesn't fit into the shot entirely. I should have expected a big box, but honestly, nothing prepared me for a box as massive as this. And this has introduced some fresh doubt in me as to whether this loco is actually going to be capable of running on my track. I'm quite concerned. Hornby say that this is rated for third radius as a minimum. Well, my layout has some second radius on it, so it's possible that this is going to derail horribly, but I decided to get one. At the very least, we can have a good look at this loco, and I will be able to test it for you in some capacity. So, as you can see, this is a Rivarossi big boy, Rivarossi being a Hornby brand, and I am aware that there are other brands of big boy available. People have told me that a lot of them are great. However, for me, living in the UK, I decided that this was the best option for me. Some of the other big boy models out there, while they may be better, they were very, very expensive, and to ship them over here into the UK would also have cost me an awful lot. This loco here was stocked by British retailers, which meant that I was able to have this shipped to me quite inexpensively. So yes, I know the Rivarossi big boy does date back quite a few years. It might not be as modern and detailed as some of the others, but this is the one I went for. I also hear that this model has seen some upgrades. This is not the same as the original Rivarossi big boy, so I'm really curious to see what those are. Right, let's talk about the price then. So the RRP is £379.95 on Hornby.com. Yeah, that's an incredible amount of money, but it's actually quite a lot less than other big boys out there. I know the Broadway Limited one, for instance, much more expensive than this. Having said that though, still a lot of money, so I still have some pretty high expectations for this. Having said that, I bought this from Hatton's for £318, which is much better, but still over £300. So what is this going to be like? Is it going to work on my layout? Is it going to be worth the money? I don't know, but one thing's for certain, this is going to be a huge loco, the largest I have ever owned, and I cannot wait to see it. So let's get started. So here we go then with what will almost certainly be the largest loco I will ever unbox, and it's certainly the largest loco box I've ever seen. I really like the artwork on it though. Got this lovely sort of painting slash artwork on the front, really nice modern looking packaging. Let me show you the end of the box then, so you can see the version I've got. This is HR2884. It is the Union Pacific big boy, and this is an articulated steam locomotive with a fuel tender, and this is the Union Pacific Steam Heritage Edition. And this is certainly well presented for a special edition. I particularly like this shiny Union Pacific number plate on the end there. Yeah, they've gone to some trouble to present this nicely. Anyway, it is time to lift the lid, so let's take our first look at the Rivarossi big boy. And the lid is quite tricky to undo here. I'm struggling against a bit of a vacuum that it's creating. But there we go, I've got it off, and everything is covered by foam, as you can see. Let's prise this off, and this is some very tough foam actually. But there is the loco inside in all its glory. But thankfully it does look a little bit smaller now. I was afraid it was going to be the length of the entire box. Luckily, it doesn't seem to be. Anyway, I think I've spotted some instructions or paperwork behind the loco, so let's just pull out the blister pack and we'll take a look at some of this. So this one looks like it's going to be an exploded diagram, and indeed it is. So these drawings appear to just be of the sort of driven bogies, for lack of a better term, yet they don't show too much of the actual loco mechanism, so we'll take a look at that in just a second. And then on the back, here's the loco chassis, or the body. It does show the motor there, so you get some idea of how this is going to work. Hopefully this will have a better mechanism than the old Rivarossi big boys, which are not great by modern standards. This suggests that yes, this has been upgraded though, so that's pretty good. And what's this other bit of paperwork? This looks like it's going to be, yeah, something quite generic, so I won't go into too much detail on that. Right, we've got some accessories in here, and there's something quite interesting in one of the internal bags, so let me pop that out and show it to you. So yeah, here we go. We've got a couple of flags inside here. They do seem to be quite high quality as well, very nicely produced, and I assume these will go at the front of the loco somewhere. Yeah, I'll try and find a locating hole in just a second. In the main accessories bag, we have a spare set of wheels. That's quite interesting. So I assume then that the model itself has traction tyres fitted to it, and this is a set of wheels without tyres so that you can fit that if you want to. There's also a few other loco detail parts in there as well if you want to fit. Very nice. Anyway, let's pull the loco and tender back in, and let's try and open this up. Here we go. And folks, I'm seeing a problem already. Look at this. We've got a wheel. Now, shouldn't that be fitted to the model, you think? Yeah, I think it probably should be. That's not a great start, is it? So hopefully this is not a bad sign for the quality of this loco, because if this is poor quality, then I've just wasted an awful lot of money on something like this. Hopefully that's just a fluke. Right, let's start with the tender then, which has its own blister packaging. Let's open this up and take a look inside. And look at that on the top. We've got a hose by the looks of it, which looks particularly good. That's a lot more detail than I was expecting, I must say. Let's lift this up. Yeah, it's quite a heavy tender, this, and it has quite an interesting design as well. We've got a bogie at the front, which is free to move. There's a truck at the back, which kind of pivots and springs around. And then the rest of the wheels are just like a standard 8-wheel tender, which I guess explains how this thing can work on relatively tight curves. Hopefully it'll work on mine, but I'm not sure. Seems to have a good finish to it. Yeah, it's not a bad looking tender at all. It's got some decent detail as well. More on this later on. Alright then, it is time to take a look at the loco. Let's do a bit of a reveal then. Let's open up the blister, pull away the plastic, and there we go. Wow. Even though this is quite a cheap big boy compared with some, I must say, at a distance, on first glance, this looks very, very impressive. Finish, not too bad, and it certainly seems to have a few separate details on it. That's pretty impressive. Right, let's try lifting this up, see if I can spot where that wheel came from. And yeah, there it is, front bogie there. So hopefully I'll be able to get that back on without any harm done, we'll see. Anyway, yeah, loco not particularly heavy. I must say that most of the body here seems to be just made of plastic. Hopefully there will be a die-cast chassis on the inside, so we'll get a bit of quality, but it's certainly not the heavy loco that I was expecting, given the sheer size of this thing. It's probably going to come out at a reasonable weight just because of its sheer size, but I must say I was expecting it to be heavier. Now that we're looking a bit closer at the loco, I must say the detail does not look amazing. It seems as though you're paying for the size of the model rather than the quality and the detail of the model. But honestly, at over £300, you're still going to have some relatively high expectations. Anyway, let me hold this with the tender, and it is an impressive spectacle, regardless of how the level of detail turns out. This does look like something quite special, and it is a relatively cost-effective way of getting a big boy into your collection, so there's that. Anyway, we'll take a closer look at the level of detail in just a second, but first of all, here's a bit of background on the big boys themselves. The Union Pacific big boy locomotives were a fleet of 25 articulated locomotives manufactured by Alco between 1941 and 1944. They were introduced a few years after the Challenger type locomotive, which was a 4664, yet despite their massive size, they had to be double-headed in order to handle the steepest parts of the railroad. The big boys were designed to do the job by themselves, requiring no second engine, and they were the only locomotives to use the 4884 wheel configuration. The big boy has the longest body of any steam locomotive at over 85 feet or 25 metres long, and it's also the heaviest at 345 tonnes. For comparison, Britain's largest steam locomotive, the Standard Class 9F, weighed 87 tonnes. So this big boy weighs 4 times as much. While 25 were built in total, today only 8 survive. But that's still a lot of locomotive, I suppose, given their size. Only one of those 8, though, is currently in operation, making it the largest and most powerful operating steam locomotive in the entire world. So there she is, the Rivarossi big boy, up close and personal for you. And yeah, this thing is an absolute beast. But it's not dreadfully heavy. It is heavy compared with other locos in my collection, but not really given its size. So it's 773 grams loco and tender, which means rather than being 4 times the weight of the 9F as it would be in real life, it's actually only more like 1.5 times the weight. So it's not a light locomotive by any means, but I think I was expecting more for £300. Having said that, I am not disappointed in the size of this loco. Here it is next to Britain's largest, the 9F, and as you can see, the big boy loco alone, without its tender even, is much longer than both the 9F and its tender. So the size is absolutely insane. It's crazy, in fact. Alright, let's talk quality then. So we had a slightly bad start with the wheel, which had just dropped off in the packaging. Obviously, I've had to refit that and it looks okay, although that's non-trivial because you can't just slap it on there. You've got to re-gauge it properly, otherwise it's going to have issues. So not dreadfully impressed by that. From a distance, it does look great, I must say. It looks like a complex model, and there's certainly a lot going on here, but up close, the quality of the moulding leaves quite a lot to be desired in several areas. This does not look like a model that was tooled up anytime recently, unfortunately. As you can also see, there's quite a noticeable join line across the top of the loco, which again, at over £300 is borderline unacceptable. There's also noticeable damage to the chimney. In fact, both of the funnels are cracked at the front here, and I'm going to call inadequate packaging on that one. I did comment on the foam being quite tough, and I think it's a little bit too tough, so that rather than absorbing any shock, it's actually passing it through to the model, and we've seen damage here on the chimney and yeah, also on the front bogie as well. So for the size of the box and the amount of excess foam in there, it didn't really do that good a job of protecting the loco. In terms of the finish though, it looks pretty decent. We've got a satin sheen to this, which looks decently modern, and there's also a few different sections of the body picked out. You've got the firebox, which is painted into this sort of silvery grey, and some of the detailed pipework on there has also been picked out, which does look good even though it's just a part of the moulding. The smoke box is also a separate colour too. Fine join between that and the rest of the body, and you've also got some very finely printed detail on the side too, which again looks good and modern. You've also got the number boards above the smoke box with the running numbers on those as well. The cylinders have been picked out on this model, and of course there are a lot of cylinders on this. We've got 4 of them and they all look good like this one does, nicely picked out. And here are the flags, which are great quality. They're nicely made. I think the stems at least are made of metal, and they do add a splash of colour to an otherwise quite basic livery. The axle boxes are picked out as you can see, and up on the cab side we have the running number and also the wheel configuration alongside some other info, all very nicely printed. It must be said though that the model does rely very heavily on moulded detail. So this detailing across the boiler is just a part of the mould. These are not separately fitted parts. The safety valves and whistles and such, these are just moulded parts which have been glued to the boiler all in one go. They're not separately fitted. And the finish of these parts is quite plasticky as a result, and the whistle is the same. Yeah, not the most convincing whistle up close here. We do, however, have a very fine metal handrail, which is separate, so it's not entirely moulded, it's not Lionel quality, but I have seen better, that's for sure. The front pilot area of the Loco is quite a bit more impressive though. There's quite a lot of finely detailed components around here. None of them are particularly complex, but the sheer number of them do make the Loco look more complex than it is. I think this is the best area of the Loco by far. If you stand back, it looks very much okay. The wheels look decent too. The wheels themselves have the moulded plastic centres in the way that most Hornby wheels do, although the centres here, the axles, are uncovered and left shiny, which is a little bit unrealistic but not too bad. The coupling rods and valve gear are very chunky on this Loco, but then again that is going to be accurate. This is the world's largest steam locomotive. They do have pretty large and chunky rods. They're serious beasts, and as a result I think this is quite realistic. There's quite a bit of detail across the top of the model, if you can ignore the seam line, including this separately fitted generator. I assume that's what it is. Let's take a look at the cab then, which has some glazing on the outside, which is quite a modern feature, I suppose, and very surprisingly it does have some painted cab detail. It is very basic, and I have seen much better on far cheaper models than this, but I'm fairly sure the old Rivarossi big boys did not have any painted detail here, so they've definitely tried to make some improvements to the model. They've also added a cab light, although strangely the board is positioned too low down so that it covers up some of the gauges, so less effective than it could have been. Not sure why they did that really, it's very strange. But again, it shows the intent to upgrade the Loco, although I must say I think they'll have to do more than this to bring this whole thing up to modern standards. Before we move on to the tender, let's take a look at the smoke box, which looks great. You've got the detailed handrail on the front and the big boy lettering drawn on as it is on the real thing. It does look as though we've got a lamp on the front here, so fingers crossed this will work too, as well as the cab lighting. Working lights would definitely be a great feature on here. And I almost forgot to talk about this bell. Yeah, we've got this moving bell, which, like I say, is hinged and movable, although again, just made of plastic. Okay, let's move on and look at the tender, and I think again the best feature of the tender is its size. It's gigantic, isn't it? It does have a fair bit of moulded detail on it though, and the riveting certainly looks fine. I suppose the quality of the moulding on the tender is quite a bit better than the Loco, particularly up on top. There's quite a bit of detail up here, much of it has been picked out as well. And you've also got this hose, this coiled up hose, which looks fantastic, fitted onto the top there. I believe that is a separately fitted part. The decoration, while simple, is still effective, I would say. You've got the Union Pacific lettering on the side, which looks fine, and you've also got the axle boxes, which have been picked out. Like the Loco, we do have some separately fitted wire handrails on the sides of the tender here, and also on the top, as well as a separately fitted ladder, which is relatively fine, I suppose. We've also got a lamp on the back of the tender, and again, if this was a working lamp, that would be a great feature to help justify some of the price, so fingers crossed. And then below there, we've got a coupling. This is just a plastic coupling, it's not a metal one, as some manufacturers use, but otherwise it does seem to be a good quality one. It's free to spring, it does recenter itself quite nicely. Hopefully that will work just fine. So there you have it, that is the Rivarossi Big Boy. I would say overall this is certainly an imposing model that from a distance looks absolutely fine for the money. But obviously on closer inspection it is a very simple model compared with what you might expect for over £300. Like I say though, this is a gigantic locomotive, and yet this is probably the cheapest big boy that is currently available, particularly if you're in the UK and you don't want to have to pay a fortune to have one imported and then got to pay all of the associated fees. So I would say this is a good option if you're on a budget, but that's only if it works well. I won't be able to recommend this to you if not. So let's get this down onto the track, let's see how it performs, and let's also take a look at the mechanism. So there she is, the Rivarossi Big Boy down onto the track for the first time, coupled up to her tender, because I couldn't fit them both onto my white background a second ago. And yeah, the effect of them both together is absolutely marvellous. This truly is an incredibly large locomotive. Still can't believe quite how massive this is. Anyway, I've already filmed the initial performance test, so I won't spoil what happened in that. I'll show you that later on. After I'd run in the Loco, I went on and inspected the mechanism, and that's what I want to talk about next. Now, with the mechanism, as with quite a few Locos, there's some good and some bad in this one. I must say though, I would have expected better for a Loco of this price, and hopefully you'll see what I mean. First of all, there are no tender pickups of any kind. There is this connector between the Loco and the tender, but as far as I can tell, that is just for the lighting, for the lamp inside the tender, that is. But that's not too bad because obviously all of the Loco driving wheels do have pickups on them, which means you've got 8 pickups per rail, giving 16 in total. That is, to be fair, a lot more than most Locos have, so pickups not much of a problem. Here's the drawbar solution. It's just this insecure drawbar, which unfortunately is quite easy to uncouple by accident. Now, again, because of this Loco's size, I get it, it is necessary to be able to disconnect these two quite easily, but I can't help feeling that in this day and age and for this price, I would have preferred to have seen some sort of push-together drawbar solution like we've seen on Hornby's latest models. This would just be a little bit neater and tidier. It would remove the need for the separate wire, which is visible from the outside of the model, and it would be slightly more rugged as well, but it is what it is. Yes, this Loco does have traction tyres. They're fitted to just 2 of the Loco driving wheels, and that confirms my suspicions about why the extra set was included. So you do have a choice not to use your traction tyres if that's what you want. But to do that, you would obviously have to swap this set in, and realistically, are you going to do that? Because it is quite a big faff to remove all of the crank pins and the rods and such that you would need to in order to do this. But technically, you have got the choice if you want to. The base keeper plate is held on by 4 screws, but the pickups unfortunately are hardwired, making full access for servicing and such a little bit tricky. You can also see that there are no bearings fitted to the axles here, and even worse than that, they fit into square slots in the chassis. That seems awfully cheap and nasty for such an expensive model. I think separate bearings would have been much more like it for this kind of price, although admittedly the performance, at least in the short term, doesn't seem to be affected by that decision. The instructions show that body removal is achieved via undoing 2 screws, one at the front, one at the back. There is a choice at the back though, so I went for the bigger one, and it turned out that one was correct. Removing the body, I found that inside was a mostly plastic chassis, not very substantial. In fact, most of the Loco weight comes from these separate weights that are just stuck in place. So again, quite cheaply produced for the money here. The motor, however, looks great. It's a massive, very chunky 5-pole skew-wound motor, which does have a flywheel, as you can see. Looks much better than the motors Rivarossi used to use in their big boys, so that is a definite major upgrade. Otherwise, this works pretty much like a diesel. You've got driving shafts coming from the motor, which connect to the gear trains, which as you can see are free to pivot with the wheel sets, and that's how the Loco works. I think looking at the Loco from the outside like this, you might expect it to be very complicated, but on the inside it's actually very simple, which is exactly what you want. It's a great illusion, this one. And then here is the DCC socket. Again, nice and modern, 21 pin and quite easy to access. Remember, it's just a couple of screws to remove the body, and obviously there's lots of space inside the Loco too. The gauge is interesting as well. That comes in much lower than usual, about 14mm on average, which is well below the standard. I assume though that they've probably done this to allow the model to negotiate tighter curves. So there you go, that is the mechanism. In some ways it's great. I love the quality of the motor. It's got adequate pickups, choice of traction tyres, whatnot. In other areas, serviceability and also the lack of bearings and the square slots in the chassis, not quite so good. But how is the performance? Let me roll the clip of the first performance test. Alright, moment of truth time. Clearly this is a very impressive looking Loco, but in order to sell that illusion completely, it will also have to run impressively as well. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself there. Does it work at all? Should be the first question. So, does it? Power, forwards direction, let's see. Here goes. First test. Wow. Okay, so I've tested an old Rivarossi big boy back in the day. I think I was repairing it for somebody. That did not run as well as this. This is dramatically different. That was a genuinely smooth start. Now this is quite a budget big boy. I wasn't expecting this to be such a great performer, but actually that was excellent. And it's not even been run in yet. Let's see what the gearing's like. Let's run it by at 50% speed. So this is half power. Very, very sensible gearing. It's really not racing along too much, so that is marvellous. Let's have a close look and see if this loco can crawl. Can it? Let's go. We're easing it up very gently. Do you know what? It can. It's moving. A little more maybe? Look at that. That is incredible. Alright. I must say at this point I am won over by this loco. Not dreadfully impressed by the quality or the detail, but this changes things. This is legitimately one of the best running locos I've got, and yet it is so complex that I would not have expected that. Alright, that is awesome. What about lighting then? So, in the forwards direction we do indeed have a working lamp on the front. It looks as though, regardless of the direction, we do have the cab lighting, which is very bright actually. Yeah, that looks wonderful. We do indeed have a light on the back of the tender. So the loco also has a decent lighting package then. That's very good. But the big question remains, will this massive loco work on my second radius curves? According to Hornby, it will not. This is rated for third radius and above, so I could be in for some disappointment there, but obviously if that happens, it's not the loco's fault, it's mine for running it on curves that are too tight. But I think it's worth a try, so very tentatively, let's try and run this in. Here we go, 50%. Gosh, why do I feel nervous for the loco? So, fourth radius at the moment, should be rated for that, seems okay. Here comes the second radius now. Good luck, big boy. Oh, so far so good. Not even slowing down. Gosh, it's done it. Okay. Wow, that was not expected. But here we have a Rivarossi big boy working perfectly on second radius track. That is crazy. It's rated for third radius. Here it is working on second, and that was a tricky set of curves. If you look, there's quite an S-bend there, as you can see. Not bad for the world's largest steam locomotive, and not only that, it's better than quite a lot of other locos that are rated for second radius curves, which slow down to a crawl with no torque around those curves whatsoever. This loco is genuinely running perfectly, like really perfectly. Fantastic at all speeds, capable of handling tight curves. Very, very impressive. So while this might not be the greatest in terms of quality and detail, I honestly can't see one of the more expensive big boys running better than this, frankly because this is perfect in its performance. So I would say this is indeed a great value option if you're looking for a big boy. Anyway, I'm going to keep running this in. I'll be back in just a second. Okay folks, I am back, and that was wonderful. It really was. It's done the full run in there, no slowing down, no problems, no derailments, no cutting out, absolutely no issues whatsoever. I have tank engines that struggle more on second radius curves than this did, and I'll have to hand it to whoever designed this. That really is quite wonderful. So the pulling power is 1.1 newtons, which should equate to around 60 coaches on straight and level track, although of course that is due to those traction tyres. Without those tyres, I don't think the loco would be that powerful, because obviously it is quite light. But either way, out of the box, it is a powerful runner. So in just a moment, I'm going to couple up to some of these hoppers. Obviously, the loco is going to make mincemeat of those because I don't have too many, but it will mean that I can at least demonstrate the loco with a bit of a load. Right, let's just test the crawl again, because obviously it was great before, but I want to check that it still is, and it's worth looking at. It's just mesmerizing. The motion on the loco here is just wonderful. The slowness that it can achieve here is just extreme. Look at that. And also when you accelerate, it does it so gradually and gently as well. You get the real flywheel effect as well. If I cut it out, you can see it slows down gradually, and I'm not going to do the torque test with my finger because obviously I don't want the motor to struggle against those traction tyres. But yeah, it's a genuinely very impressive model. From its performance point of view, that is by far the strongest aspect of the model. So with that, let's back up to the hoppers and let's check that the coupling works. Here we go. And of course it's possible to be very, very slow and careful with the coupling here, so let's do that. And, oop, yeah, I think I've been a bit too slow and gentle there, haven't I? Let's try again. All right, yeah, that looks better. Okay, yeah, still another beautifully smooth start there. So we'll keep an eye on this loco and we'll see how the performance changes now that it's got a load. On the middle line, I am running the UK's largest steam locomotive, which is obviously nothing at all compared with the big boy. It looks like a Ginty compared with the big boy, but there it goes. It's got some wagons. Must say the big boy's a better performer than this as well. It's quite surprising. And then on the inside line, I am running what used to be one of the largest steam locos in my collection. So this is the Bachmann GS4. Obviously that is no longer the case. The big boy is much larger than this. Speaking of the big boy then, let's go and check in with that, see how she's getting on, or he, I suppose. Should be a big boy, shouldn't it? It's not looking any different with a load, it must be said. No slowing down still, or maybe a tiny bit on the curves, but no more than normal and no more than much smaller locos do. And it certainly isn't struggling with these few wagons that I've got coupled up, so that is fantastic. So what have we got here? We've got a loco that looks imposing. It really does on the track. It's not fazed by rolling stock, and in terms of performance, it is much, much better than I was expecting. Having said that, if you want an all-singing, all-dancing big boy with maybe bang-up-to-date detail, sound, smoke, metal boiler, lots of die-cast, then I would suggest looking at maybe the Broadway Limited version. It sounds as though that one fits the bill. Clearly this big boy from Rivarossi is not that, but what it is cheaper, it is obviously more affordable, and obviously quite basic and plasticky in its construction, but it is a big boy. It looks like a big boy, it's got the presence on the track that the big boys have, and it runs amazingly. So I think as long as you understand that you're buying quite a basic model here, and maybe it is a little bit pricey for what you get, but I think it is the cheapest new big boy at least that you can buy at the moment, and I do think this performance makes it quite compelling. Also, while it doesn't look that great up close, from any sort of distance this does look fantastic, doesn't it? It really does look great, and again the performance just helps to sell that illusion. So overall, a massive thumbs up. Let's do some ratings then for the Rivarossi big boy. Level of detail I've given 3-star. Now there's good and bad in the detail here. I think although the mechanism is relatively modern, the tooling by the looks of things dates back quite a long way. And the decoration and paintwork is modern and that looks fantastic. And there are some modern features in the detail such as the painted cab, the working lights and whatnot. And these things come together, like I say, to make the model look pretty decent from any sort of distance. However, the model also relies quite heavily on moulded detail, and some of the moulding is not that great. You've got a few messy parts here and there, not the most finessed model in the world, and it also relies on plastic detailing for the various metal parts, which don't look that great as a result. So definitely a mixed bag, but not too bad. Can't say the same for performance though, because I've not been able to fault the performance in any way. It's beautifully smooth, it's capable of doing an excellent crawl. Despite what Hornby say on the listings, this can handle second radius curves. Take that with a pinch of salt. There may be some second radius combinations that don't work properly. I'm not guaranteeing that this will work on your second radius, but at a push, yes, it works fine on that as well. Great torque, no slowing down on the curves, and there's power to spare even when there is rolling stock coupled up. So it's a genuine 5-star performer. The pulling power, take with a pinch of salt. Again, I don't know what this would be like without the traction ties fitted. I don't fancy doing it, frankly, because it would mean taking out the crank pins and, you know, it's a big faff. I don't really want to do that. But with the traction ties fitted, it is a good puller, and you can't argue with 60 coaches. The mechanism itself, again though, is middle of the road. There is good in this mechanism. It's got lots of pickups on the Loco, although I kind of wish the Tender had some just for that little bit of extra reliability, but that's not really a problem. You've got the hardwired base keepers, which are not that great for servicing, and mainly you've got the lack of proper bearings with the square slots into the chassis. That is not a good quality feature at all. On the flip side though, you have got the good quality motor, which must be fantastic given the performance of this thing. Flywheel of course, and a lot of driven wheels on this Loco. Very good mechanism design. The quality then I've given 3-star. Again, there's nothing wrong with the decoration. The quality of the paintwork is fantastic. However, it is a plasticky model, lots of plasticky details like I said, not a very heavy chassis particularly, and a plastic body as well. Also, the quality of the moulding is not that high. There's a number of parts, as you saw earlier on, that don't look that great, either because they were brilliant to start with, or because the tooling has aged quite a bit and it's now looking a little bit old and tired. That brings us on to value for money then, and it's a bit tricky here because at the moment I can't find any other new big boys cheaper than this. I think the Athern one may have been cheaper at some point, but I don't know how old that price is. This is certainly cheaper than some of the other better big boys out there, like I said earlier on, particularly if you're in the UK, because to have one shipped over here from the States would obviously be much more costly. So this is a good value option compared with other big boys, but compared with other models, I must say the value isn't great here because of the reasons I've just described. You've got the plastic construction, lack of detail. I think at over £300 or considerably over if you pay the RRP, this ought to have been a little bit better. So I've given it middle of the road. It's certainly a good value big boy, but not a great value model in general, I would say. So overall then, that is a middle of the road score of 6.87 out of 10. There's a lot of good and bad in this Loco. Overall though, it comes out with a grade D. Into the logbook it goes, and there it is, 27th place above the Bachmann Ryan and below the Triang Victorian train set. So can I recommend the Rivarossi big boy? Well, it's tricky, isn't it? If you just want to own a big boy and you want a model that looks okay and runs well, and you don't really mind that it's relatively expensive, then sure, yes, I could totally recommend this. If money is no object and you want that super modern, super detailed, all singing, all dancing big boy, then no, you'll be disappointed with this. If you've got the money to spend, you might as well spend the whole hog and get a different brand big boy which has more features. So it very much depends on what you're looking for. Personally though, for me, this big boy is just the job because I'm from the sort of former category, I guess. I really just wanted a big boy. I just wanted something decent, if not outstanding, and performance is what I value really more than appearance and detail. And that's pretty much exactly what I got. I'm actually not disappointed in this big boy at all. So let me know what you think. Have you tried one of these big boys? Do you have a big boy from another brand? How does it compare? Is it better? And which big boy do you think is the most worthwhile of the different ones available? Please do let me know. For now though, that will just about do it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Alright, cheers folks. You take care.